So the joke is, who's the futurist and who's the planetary ethicist? Okay? So we're rolling, right?
Right.
Okay. So first of all, I'm the futurist.
I'm the ethicist, right?
Right.
Planetary ethicist, right.
And everybody here knows Tim. And those that don't know me, I'm the futurist in residence and guest lecturer at the Ringling College of Art and Design. And I've guest lectured at pretty much everybody's classes except his and yours to be. And so as a guest lecturer, I started guest lecturing in this man's class, environmental studies. And I found not only did I want to keep guest lecturing, I wanted to come and listen and learn. And Tim really is the smartest guy I've ever met about the connectedness and the interconnectedness of planet Earth. And I've been writing about this stuff for a long time. So about 2 years ago, was it right?
Yeah, about 2 years ago.
We decided to write a book on climate change. And I'll turn it over to Tim to kind of fill in the story a little bit.
Well, it started a whole series of conversations. After class, we would then talk more about the topics that we've been discussing. And then we, as you said, we decided that, rather than just having the conversation between us, we should broaden it. And so that was the idea that became the book. And then we went through a couple of ideations of the book, in part because we found that the information was changing so quickly that if we kept it sort of data heavy, the book would be out of date prior to publication. And so, so we kept it a readable length.
Very thin.
An enjoyable readable length.
If you're an average reader, it should take you 2 hours.
Right. With more of the philosophy and materials in it, and sort of bigger pictures of some understanding of why this is happening and what you can do about it. And then we've created the website for the updates of publications and the data. And then from that conversation, we then formed a not-for-profit foundation to basically figure out different ways of taking the discussion to a broader global level, and that's what we're doing now. And
right.
So
great.
Have fun.
So I will have fun. So the point is of that is I got together, and there's Tim. The third person who's on this team is Devin Lee Ostertag, who is a 2012 BOAD graduate and has been working for me since she graduated. And the fourth person is a tech marketing guy from Sarasota who's the director of operations. And what we decided was we didn't want to be perceived to make money off of climate change. So we set up this global nonprofit, and the messaging is, Tim and I are involved with the Ringling College of Art and Design. Design is the central concept for climate change. Sarasota is at high risk for climate change, and Florida is the #1 state at risk in the country for climate change. So this is a perfect place to launch a global nonprofit. And we just launched it this past weekend with the beta site. And so to jump right into it, the concept around this spaceship Earth is what is on the front of the book. There are no passengers in spaceship Earth. We are all crew. So the nonprofit is to create crew consciousness on the planet about this spaceship, because it's the only place we have, at least for 5 generations, until we can colonize Mars with any critical mass. So I'm going to go through this PowerPoint. Can everybody see it okay? Is the light too bright? So here are some quotes that drove us, and I'll stand over here. First one, we're not going to be able to operate our spaceship Earth successfully, nor for much longer, unless we see it as a whole spaceship and our fate is common. It has to be everybody or nobody. My favorite one on the front of the book, there are no passengers in spaceship Earth, we're all crew. This from a guy in 1948. Once a photograph of the Earth is taken from the outside, we hadn't been in space, is available, a new idea as powerful as any in history will be let loose. And this great one, you can develop an instant global consciousness, a people orientation, intense dissatisfaction with the state of the world, and a compulsion to do something about it. From out there on the moon, international politics look so petty. You want to grab a politician by the scruff of the neck and drag him 250,000 miles out here and say, look at that, you son of a bitch, right? Now, he just died last month, I think it was, or maybe in February, Edgar Mitchell. And he was one of the ones that was really transformed. He went into all kind of consciousness movements, because being out on the moon changed his consciousness. He almost had a whole new age global God consciousness. So what is happening right here, and a lot of these facts, in fact, most of the facts have come from Tim. I've sat at his feet for 2 years. What is happening in spaceship Earth in the atmosphere hasn't happened for 800,000 years, but modern humanity has only been around for 200,000 years. So the point is, the reason there's so much issue around climate change is that it's not even in our DNA to understand what's going on. And scientists are coming with parts, but there's no holistic view, and that's what our mission is. So there's no history or precedence for what's occurring. So we have to change consciousness. Whenever there's something that is new, that's incomprehensible, that cannot be understood, you change consciousness. Often in humanity, we come up with something called God to solve that question because we can't answer it, right? So change of consciousness is the first step. And so we must move from, and I love, this is Tim's phrase, an unaware cruise ship mentality to a spaceship crew consciousness. If you're on a cruise ship, stuff goes over the side, don't know where the food comes from, it doesn't matter, and you're in this isolated situation. We have to go from silos and lack of connectedness to everything being interconnected. And that's what we have to do. Where we are has come because everybody thought of silos. They didn't think how this silo would affect that one, and it would all affect the whole. So that's a great phrase now. With 7.4 billion people on the planet, everybody is downwind or downstream from someone else. So the pollution we put in the air today will be breathed in Fort Lauderdale tomorrow, right? So we're all in this together. So this is a really interesting concept. So we have an Earth, but today humans use the equivalent of 1.5, now it's 1.6 planets to provide resources we use and absorb the waste we generate. So it takes the Earth 18 months to regenerate what we use in 12 months. So if you think of the concept of a spaceship, anybody seen The Martian? Yeah, so the idea is, how much do we have on board if we can do this? So since 1970, we started operating at 1.1, then 1.2, now 1.6 spaceship Earths per year. So we've been operating in the red zone for 45 years. So there's no spaceship that can operate in deficit. Most spaceships get resupplied. We're not getting resupplied. Now this isn't even, this is per capita, okay? So if you live in the United States, the United States has 4% of the population, 25% of energy consumption, which means that we have to have 5 Earths to sustain the American way of life. The problem is we're really good at advertising. So we persuaded the rest of the world that the American way of life is the way to do it. So the UK, after World War II, started saying, hey, we want to be like them. China, even though China is the #1 polluter, we're #2, India's #3, this is per capita. So it wasn't until the 1990s that China said, oh, we want to be like the United States as well. And the cheap stuff is coal, we'll go with coal. And then India's coming on board with coal. So it's not equal. This is one of the moral issues about climate change because of the fact that we, Americans, are saying, wait a minute, you can't do coal, India. And they're kind of going, well, wait a minute, you've been doing it. Why don't we have the right to do it now? The problem is, when we started doing it, there was 1 billion people, less than 1 billion people on the planet, and now there's 7.3. So this is one of those issues. Earth Overshoot Day last year was August 13th, right? Which means that every day after August 13th, we were going into deficit utilizing finite resources on the spaceship that were not getting replenished. So the goal is to make sustainability redefined from a global point of view, operating spaceship Earth at 1.0 or less. So in other words, Earth Overshoot Day should be midnight, 12/31, right? But since we've been operating at a deficit for 45 years, logic dictates we have to go below operating spaceship Earth at 1.0. So one of the key missions of what this nonprofit is to get the world to think sustainability only on a global scale, because anything less than that is not a relevant definition. So this is minus 8,000. So this is 10,000 years. This is the agricultural age. This is when all the great civilizations of the world were created. And this is the level of CO2 in parts per million. And here we go. It's been pretty much like this all the way until we get to the 20th century in the industrial age, and it goes off the charts. So this is the relativity for recorded history about CO2. Now you go into even closer. This is the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and here are in 2010, and now we're at 401. So at the beginning of the industrial age, we were 270 parts per million. There's an organization that's been very successful called 350.org, which says we need to come back to 350 parts per million. But the problem with that is that we've been over it so long, we have to go way below it. So right now we're at 401. You can see July 20, I'm standing right here if I'm in your way just because of the camera. July 401, and it goes, so we're way out of the comfort zone, okay? Every person in this room, if you're an average American, and I think some of the students probably aren't, puts up 16 tons of CO2 into the atmosphere every year. Every adult here is responsible for 16 tons if you factor in how you drive, how you air condition, the plastics you consume. So it's pretty astounding. Now, this is methane. You saw the methane leak, whatever that ranch was, and now it's getting up. It has 28 times the greenhouse gas effect of CO2. So the fact that this stuff is leaking out is very dangerous. This is one of the things that causes fracking, because methane is leaking out from fracking. Now, the problem with humans, seeing is believing, right? If we can't see a problem, it doesn't exist. You know, it's just bad weather, as the Republican presidential candidates say. So Tim came up with this brilliant slide. What if CO2 had the visual impact of a 4-ton African elephant? Okay, this next slide is out of date because he did it a few years ago. Then now, in 2015, CO2 emissions would be the equivalent of launching 315 4-ton elephants per second into the air every second of every year. So here's what Paris would look like, right? So, you know, if during the course of a school year here at Ringling, there was an extra 200 4-ton elephants over Sarasota and Bradenton, we'd think we'd have a problem, right? Childhood's end, right? So surely that would promote an in-depth, but because it's invisible, we're going to get this animated. But that's the thing. That's a 400-ton, and we're using TONE, that's a metric ton, which is even larger. Outside the United States, it's metrics. That's how much CO2 is going into the atmosphere. Now, I'm going to play this. Anybody see Racing Extinction? Brilliant documentary. Tim and I are the only ones. Okay. So the setup here is they're trying to 158 species a day are becoming extinct on this planet. So we're trying to race that. So this is a picture of a CO2 camera.
I think it's in our DNA to take care of future generations. And if you can find that way in, you can reach people really quickly.
That's what Ringling students need to do. You're talented, you come up with great images.
So limited, we see only a tiny little sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum. It's like if you owned a grand piano in your house, but you could only hear one note on it. Normally, carbon dioxide gas is invisible to the human eye, but certain wavelengths of infrared will be absorbed by gases like CO2 or methane. So that's what's going on here. This camera has a very particular color filter on it, enabling us to visualize the CO2 gas that's coming out of our noses and mouths.
We have two cameras. One camera that sees what your eye sees, and the other, what the fossil fuel companies don't want the rest of the world to see. The carbon dioxide world. There's one coming at us. outside. But you can't see it. To be able to see this hidden world was like, you were let in on this magic trick. But the magic trick is actually killing the planet. This looks like a big parade of crap.
Needless to say, here comes the man.
Come on in, I will show you. This is very flux capacitor. It's close.
No, right here. Actually, I can spin this. You see
It's
this?
just carbon dioxide.
I mean, what, the government hiring you? Who's doing it? You just doing it alone thing? Or what?
Yeah, it's the science project.
Science project.
In many ways, our generation is the one with the last hand on the throttle, just pushes that throttle down. We're putting so much carbon dioxide, so much methane into the atmosphere.
Think about that. Isn't that amazing? That's why each one of you is responsible for 16 tons of carbon emissions a year. Now think about this. This is not in scale. So this is the Earth, which is 8,000 miles in diameter. The atmosphere is 60 miles high, 100 kilometers. So that's the only thing that's protecting us from asteroids. This is a precious biosphere. It's a spaceship that's unique in deep space. To take it even further, again, this is not in scale. It says civilization 3 miles. So round that up to 16,000 feet. All of human history has lived between sea level and 16,000 feet. So since particulates are heavy, they're concentrated in this 16,000 foot elevation from sea level up. What you just saw, all that going in, it's impossible not to intuitively understand that we are heating up the atmosphere. So, and here's another sign, and some of you may have heard climate change deniers say, well, you know, there was supposed to be an ice age in the 1970s. Yes, there was. What was that rhythm called of the ice ages through history?
Well, there's the Makalov.
The Makalov
cycle.
Showing the cycle, and that cycle was supposed to kick in the 1970s. So you see, it went down here. But not only did we increase, we upset the historical rhythm of ice ages. So yeah, we were supposed to be an ice age, but look at this. This is the number of degrees over the average here of surface temperature. Real quickly, this is not just an environmental thing. This is an economic issue of the first degree. GDP, gross national product, added up from all the countries is 75 trillion. The ecosystem supports that with $125 trillion of services. Coca-Cola doesn't account for how much water it is used, or oxygen, or whatever, or anything. So that is from the World Bank. This is very interesting. There's a place called Davos, and at the end of January every year, there's the meeting of the World Economic Forum in Davos. All the central bankers, heads of state, all the big multinational banks come and they talk. And what they talk about is the 5 top global risks in terms of likelihood to affect the global economy. Now, the ones in red are climate change. So in 2012, there was 2, rising greenhouse gas emissions, water supply crisis, again 2 in 2013. Go to 2016. All 5 of the 5 greatest risks for the global economy are related to climate change. Large-scale involuntary migration. Last year, 1 million refugees from Syria. Tim and I estimate by 2025, there'll be 10 million refugees a year due to climate change. Where are 35 million Bangladeshis going to go? Where are the people who live in Miami going to go by 2040? So there's going to be mass migration. If you have a drought for 10 years, you're going to leave, right? Second thing, extreme weather events, that's pretty clear. Failure of climate change mitigation and adaptation. Interstate conflict with regional consequences. One of the largest water aquifers in Asia is 50% under Pakistan and 50% under India. What's going to happen there? right? And lastly, major national catastrophes. It seems to me that they're happening more often. Oh, the storm of the century has happened for the last 3 years, in New Jersey. So the point is, this isn't just feel good. It isn't just morality. It is the future of our economic condition. So I just want to point out one thing here, and then I'm going to jump through a bunch of slides. See that I there? It says present. So 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth began. It's probably going to last for another 3 billion. That I represents the entire time Homo sapiens have been on the planet to give you relationship. So saving the planet is an arrogant statement to the nth degree. We're not saving the planet. As Tim says, we're saving ourselves from ourselves. Okay? We are saving ourselves from ourselves. The planet's going to be here until the sun blows up in 3 billion years. So, the dinosaurs was a crew, and they became extinct. We don't want to become extinct, and we're the first crew to have a self-awareness of that possibility, right? So, we felt this was really important. In our book, I think it's chapter 4, we talk about forgiveness. Anything with human endeavor starts with forgiveness. You're in a relationship, you have an argument, you forgive each other, and you move on. So we have to forgive everything that's happened to this moment. We have to forgive John D. Rockefeller for scaling up oil to fuel progress because he didn't know he was going to affect the polar bear's climate. We have to forgive Henry Ford for scaling up automobiles in mass production because he didn't know he'd create smog in LA. We have to forgive all of us baby boomers parents who thought having a lot of kids was a good idea because 2.1 is replacement rate. So we have to forgive to this moment. We can't argue about you did that and you did that. Here's where we are. That's why we call it this spaceship Earth. This is the state of the planet today. We have to face forward. Now, Earth Century 2016 to 2030. In my book, Entering the Shift Age, that I wrote in 2012, I called the 21st century the Earth Century, saying it's no longer day, month, week, it's an Earth century. This is the century where humanity has to accept, develop, and own its relationship with Spaceship Earth, with the planet. That's why Tim is a planetary ethicist, is an ethical decision we have to make about where the only place we live. And so that's up to 2100. But in Tim's and my analysis, we realized that we, humanity, have to create crew consciousness to such a degree that we have to do it by 2030. If we do it by 2030, there is a chance for civilization to survive the century. If we continue on our way, or if we continue as the Paris Accord last December came to an agreement, there will not be civilization by 2100. I am a futurist, right? Now, the reason I'm doing this and want to do this for the rest of my life is that Buckminster Fuller, the guy who came up with the phrase Spaceship Earth, said in 1969 that in several decades humanity would approach a fork in the road, utopia or oblivion. And I've been spending the last 10 years making a nice living, traveling the world, talking to people about the utopia we can have with artificial intelligence and connectivity. But in the 2 years of research with Tim, I am convinced that climate change is what Fuller was referring to as oblivion. So that's why it would be a professional dereliction of duty as a professional futurist to not talk about this. I think I'm the only futurist that is. And that's what I want to launch this we're launching a nonprofit and trying to do this. So this is the time, 2016 to 2030, where we have to change consciousness, change our ways. All this stuff about by 2050 we'll be 50% and elect won't be soon enough. There's an urgency every single day, right? Every second, 315 4-ton elephants of CO2 goes up into the air. So that's the urgency. I'm going to skip through this because of time, and I want to get to some questions. But basically, Tim's aha moment that we kind of came to together, I kind of extracted this brilliance in him, is it's not about amount of CO2 into the air every day. It's about the aggregate amount. So we are a 730 species living in a 1230 world, which means that before before the industrial age, there were 730 gigatons of CO2 in the atmosphere. We crossed 800 World War II. We crossed 830 in 1970, and now we're at 1,230. So our whole mission is to get back to, I'm not even going to, this takes too much time here, to get back to, it took us 45 years to go from 830 to 1,230, and our goal for the planet is in the next 45 years to get back to where we were in 1970. Now the Paris Accord allows by 2060 to be 1,800 gigatons. That's why it's such a failure. So that's why we felt compelled to do this. So I'm going to skip through this and get to some, okay, we have 2 chapters in the book. Chapter 8, what we collectively, the species, need to do, and Chapter 9, what each of you individually can do. This is about what we collectively have to do. We have to define sustainability, as I said earlier, at TSE, the Spaceship Earth, to be at 1.0 or less. We need to operate the spaceship at less than the finite resources that exist on it. We have to decrease fossil fuel usage ASAP, right? With that much CO2, we have to, every bit of news now is pointing towards the fact, I wrote a major column, people don't agree with me necessarily, but I think I'm going to be right, that 2015 to 2017 is the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel era. By 2025, by 2030, it will be looked back on as somewhere around this time, fossil fuel usage decreased. We have to accelerate that decrease. We have to get to 50 to 60% of all our autos being electric as soon as possible, not by 2050. A carbon tax. We need to tax carbon. President Obama said $10 a barrel. I say $50 a barrel. The example that exists in the United States of America is that right now, the percent of adults smoking is 20%. In the 50s, it was 70%, 18 plus. The only correlation, other than some good advertising that it's unhealthy for you, the only correlation was taxing cigarettes. When I was your age in college, a pack of cigarettes was 35 cents. Now it's 10 bucks or 8 bucks somewhere, right? And almost all of that is tax. So when a cigarette went from being a penny to being 50 cents, people stopped smoking. So there's a correlation, and seatbelts, right? Seatbelts became the law. We've cut mortality in the highways by 75%. Buckle up, it's the law, right? So we're going to have laws imposed upon us for survival if we don't take independent action. Completely rethink agriculture. Agriculture puts up more greenhouse gas emissions than all of the transportation sector around the world. So we have to change that. We've industrialized it to the point, and we can dig into that, and we can do some Q&A on that. But for example, one of the things I say as I travel the country talking about this, take all the empty big box stores, don't tear them down, make them vertical gardens, right? There's got to be vacant big box stores around here because with all the new retail coming in, there's vacant retail. Don't tear it down. Make it vertical gardens. You get 3, 4, or 5 crops a year, not 1 or 2. It's inside. You don't need insecticides. It doesn't degrade the soil. And it's the farm-to-table movement. It's local food, which means that instead of going into Publix and buying an avocado that has a carbon footprint to come from California, you're right down the street from the thing that used to be the Best Buy store. Global effort to redesign and retrofit buildings. This is where I start looking at the Ringling students, because design is central to climate change. We have to redesign how we live. We have to redesign how we transport, redesign agriculture, redesign everything. And the estimate 20 years ago was we could cut energy costs, expenses, usage by 20 to 25% by retrofitting all the buildings in the United States. That's still the case, right? Pretty much. So there's a 25% savings there. We have to move to this Spaceship Earth consciousness on population growth. This is one of the issues that's kind of dicey. You can't tell people how many kids they can have. The replacement rate in a population is 2.1 kids per childbearing woman, okay? Fortunately, in the world, we're down to 2.6. In the United States and Europe, we're below 2, but in Africa, they're still at 4 or 5. So what is the morality about bringing in a completely dependent passenger on a spaceship with finite resources? We have to, for example, in the United States, you get a tax credit if you have a kid. We should have a tax payment if you have a kid. You know, from the age of, say, 16 to the age of 45 for women, you get a $1,000 tax credit every year you don't have a kid, right? I mean, how do you deal with that? It's a really serious question because there's the climate scientists that Tim knows better than I do are all depressed about this. There's 7.4 billion people on the planet, and if things go as they are, the rough estimates is 500 to 2 billion people alive by 2100 because of the hunger riots, the starvation, the flooding, the lack of water, the wars that will break out for survival. So do we want to have that type of future, or do we have a future where over 3 generations of childbearing women, every woman chooses, rather than it being allowed, which is what's going to happen by 2030, to have 1 child? It makes the women in the room think about, do I want this dude to be the father of my 1 child, right? Think about that, right? And the other thing is, quite frankly, it is a gender issue. We've never called it Father Earth. We call it Mother Earth. So women should be in control of population going forward. Because men just want more, hey, another one, right? You know? So the point is, I'm trying to make a joke out of what is a really deep moral issue. Because if we went to 1 child per childbearing woman between now and 2060, our population would go down to 5 billion without any death, without any wars, without any of that. So we can proactively reduce procreation and survive, or not pay attention to it and kill each other. I mean, it's a real significant question. Pope Francis has got it mostly right, except for that part, but he's coming around on that part, right? Renewable energy technologies, not extraction. Any kind of extraction is those relative arguments. So natural gas isn't as bad as coal. They're all bad. As Buckminster Fuller used as a metaphor, why would you want to go into your savings account to live off it? In other words, savings account is fossil fuels. Why would you want to live off your income, right? 1 hour of sunlight captured per day fuels humanity for the day, 1 hour. So that means if we capture 2 or 3, 4 hours, we're actually banking energy, right? So we don't want to go in and extract. You don't want to live off your savings account. You want to live off your income. And because it's renewable, solar and wind, we can have an abundance of energy every day to pay it forward. Atmospheric cleansing. This is the technology breakthrough that I started talking about 6 years ago, right? In other words, vacuum cleaning CO2 out of the air. There is technologies now that are coming online that are doing this locally. You know, they take the thing that purifies the air inside and they put it, a 3-story version out in a plaza, and it cleans up the plaza. This is what I want to say to Silicon Valley, which is this is the big bet, along with Tesla. This is the big bet. We don't need another social app. We need somebody. How rich will somebody get who comes up with the technology that saves civilization? Literally. Right? If we can pull down, we have 315 elephants going up per second. If we can pull down 700 elephants per second, we're going to start to get there. And it's already being done to some degree. I've been saying for 10 years that the single greatest wealth creation opportunity in human history is alternative renewable energy. Why? Because it's the first time in history that a product, fossil fuels, 6 billion people use, will have to be replaced in 20 to 30 years. There's never been that wealth creation opportunity. That's what the technologists and the engineers should focus on, is becoming billionaires by saving civilization. Develop a global systems approach to energy, agriculture, and emissions. It's very arrogant for Americans to say to Indonesia, you've got to be on alternative renewable energy. So we have to take the developed countries of the world who can get there first. Denmark is at 50%. New Zealand is at 85% alternative and renewable. And we need to get there so that we look at the Earth as a single system of energy. So there'll be some that may take 20 years to get off of fossil fuels, other might take 5, some may take 50. We have to look at it from a systems point of view. We have to redefine work. Who said that people all have to work from 9 to 5 on Monday through Friday? As Tim says, rush hour is the biggest misnomer in history, right? It's stop and go hour, right? We don't rush at rush hour, we go nowhere in rush hour. So we have to redefine work. Nobody has to come into work 9 to 5. I mean, what is that? It doesn't make any sense. Just look at stop and go / rush hour on I-75. And they're all sitting there. Remember the carbon camera? That's just sitting there. That's ridiculous. Plan for strategic retreat. Where are all the people in Miami going to go by 2040 or 2050, whenever it is? We have to plan for this. Where are they going to go? Look at the map of Asia and think about Bangladesh. Where are 35 million Bangladeshis going to go by 2040? Strategic retreat is the science of planning in advance for the strategic retreat of populations away from sea level rise. We have in our book the top 20 cities at risk due to sea level rise, and they are 210 million, and they include New York, New Jersey, Tampa, St. Pete, and Miami. Those 3, there's 2 alone in this state. Where are they going to move? I've been talking to climate change, to real, I don't have time to go into that. I want to get you to class on time. Okay, forecasts keep changing. What was the worst case for 2040 predicted in 1990 is happening now. The conservative estimate is a 2 to 5 foot sea level rise by 2050. So I can say to Ringling students, in your lifetime, by the time you're 55, there will be no Miami. There will be no southern part of Manhattan. This is the single greatest opportunity challenge issue of your lifetime. And James Hansen, former head of NASA, he's putting this out there. He thinks it's right. He's not totally sure. That's correct, right? Right. That it could be 10 or 15 feet by 2060. I don't know how far above sea level we are now, but we're not that, standing where I'm standing, right? So a king tide is a high tide. So this was the first place winner back in 2015 this looks familiar to anybody who's lived in Sarasota. You go out by the library, right? You see a wall like that. So low tide, woman standing on the dock. High tide, water up to her knees, and look at that wall. Now, with any waves or storms, that lawn will be salted, and that is 3 years ago, right?
Right, 3 years ago.
And that, right, that's just high tide one time a year. Any quick comment on that?
Well, I will point out that, for example, South Beach, this past series of king tides, South Beach was flooded out for 3 days. You know.
Right. Yeah. And you can tell the people who live in South Beach when you go there and those things, because they all wear boots. Yeah. The tourists are walking around flip-flops going, what is this, right? So, what is this? Quick, somebody, what is this a map of? Oh, come on. How did you get into this college?
Help me. The map.
What is it? It's a world map, right. But this is the way we think of the world. This is how we think of Spaceship Earth, right? What this is a map of the human concept of nation states. It does not exist in nature. The monarch butterfly who migrates from Canada into Mexico, do you think they know when they're going over a border? So we have to stop thinking of the world as looking like, this is nothing more than the map of the human concept of nation states. This is Spaceship Earth. This is what we live on. This is what we have to have crew consciousness to crew. So that's it. And I really, I'm sure it was the pizza, but I thank you all for being here. And those that have to go, that's fine, but I'd love to answer questions or anything. And I it's the FedEx guy, talked real fast here. But any questions? And we can do the Q&As. Some people have to leave. Somebody must have a question or a comment. How about a comment? All right, Christopher.
You're talking about atmospheric cleansing.
Yes.
You know, setting up these machines and everything.
Right.
I think, of course, obviously, it's a great idea. But what's the tipping point for, like, you start making these things, and then all the polluters are like, hey, you know, we don't need to worry about our pollution. We've got atmospheric cleansing.
Well, that's assuming that they're
In terms of consciousness, you know.
well, but the point is that they know that they can't get away with it. There's already rules and regs about that.
Right.
Right. And I think if I am right that fossil fuels, the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel era is right around now. What's going to happen is so I don't think people say I don't need to do that. I mean, I don't think that Selma, your wife, will respond favorably. Oh, there's a mess in the kitchen. I'll just clean it up on Saturday, right? And it's got to be cleaned up now. I mean, there won't be the latitude, right? There's rules and regulations. Tim.
The other thing is that what we're talking about with atmospheric cleaning is about removing the increase in resident CO2. Okay, that's really what
That's already there.
That's what we're after. And part of this is about changing the conversation from, say, what happened in Paris, which is about emissions, annual emissions, to cumulative increase in resident CO2. And so the polluters, people may want to continue to pollute, but but part of this is about expanding that conversation so that we're actually all talking about the same thing at the same time, because right now we're not. Right.
Okay. Is that? The general rule with Tim is I say what we have to do, and he explains why we have to do it. Right?
Can
Yeah.
I say another comment? No?
Yeah. Well, go right, and then next.
The biggest polluter is agriculture?
I don't know if it's the biggest. It's bigger than transportation.
Right. Right now, well, for carbon dioxide, agriculture at the moment is the largest producer of carbon dioxide, and it is the largest water user. Estimated globally, 70% of available surface water, or 70% of water use goes into agriculture at this point. And so part of the issue about redefining how agriculture is done is that if you look at the population projections, which are going to 8 billion and to 12.1 billion right now in 2100, there's no way we can scale up agriculture the way we do it, because to do that, we would actually need 150% of the available water to be able to feed people if we keep the same model of agriculture going. And not only is there only one planet, there's only 100% water. And so you rapidly sort of run into the wall.
So two things on that. One of the aha moments I had with Tim was he made the off-the-hand comment, there's the amount of fresh water on the planet now is the same as it was a million years ago. A million years ago, I don't know how many humans there were, but there's 7.3, right? So there's going to be no more fresh water. The other thing is, here's an example of crew consciousness. My favorite meal is a high-quality gourmet cheeseburger with really good fries. And up to really writing this book, I'd have that a couple times a week. Oh, I can have a cheeseburger a couple times a week. I work out. Now I don't have more than 2 cheeseburgers a month. And that's basically my meat consumption. So I have cut my meat consumption by 75%. If everybody in this room had the same profile as David Houle and did that, then this room would have cut their meat consumption by 75%. Magnify that. By the way, if you go to thisspaceshipearth.org, this was an interesting conversation we had. How many crew members do we want to recruit? And do we want to start with 3 digits and fill that up and then go to 4 and then go to 5 to 99,000? And we decided to go for 1 billion. So we have 10 digits up there. Right now we got 34 crew members, right? So the goal is we want to recruit 1 billion crew members. If 1 billion crew members cut their meat consumption by 75%, the problem would be solved about meat. Right? Because what would happen is it would drive down the price of, it would drive down the price of meat. People would start getting out of the business, right? So crew consciousness can change. So did that part of it?
Yeah.
Okay. We've industrialized it. In other words, when cows eat stuff they're not supposed to eat because it's a high production line. So if you stick something in their bottom, they have, what is it, like 3 or 4 metric 3 or 4 metric. How much does a cow of methane put out in a day?
Oh,
It's like
several pounds.
several pounds of methane, just because we've industrialized what they eat and how they eat, as opposed to the cow dung going in and refertilizing the land. Right? You had another
I'll
question.
let other people talk.
That's all right. Yeah.
I'm curious about how this can change with the current powers that control things, the oil companies, the banks, the rich and powerful. It's in their best interest to not have to keep it the way it is.
No, it's not.
I mean, in a limited sense, it is. I mean,
In a limited sense.
as long as the next quarter is the main,
So
impetus.
So there's moments of breakthrough that, as a futurist, I look for things in the present and cast them in the future, looking at the trend lines from the past, right? So Elon Musk announces the Model 3, which is the $35,000 model of the electric car. He announced it a week and a half ago. He expected 100,000 orders. He's got 300,000 down payments around the world, $1,000 each, to line up for that, okay? Think of, if I am right about the beginning of the decrease of fossil fuels, the people at CNBC, in 2020 are going to be interviewing, hey, Mr. ExxonMobil, fossil fuels are in decline. You can't drill. So you are now a short-term investment.
The thing is, they won't do that because they're owned by the fossil fuel companies.
Who's owned by the fossil?
The media. I mean, there's
Yeah, but
they're all intertwined.
money.
I'm just kind of-
I got it. Implied in what you're saying is money. Money is the driver, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so let's just talk about that.
That's in a simple
If money is the driver, and it becomes perceived that last year was the first year where there was no increase in fossil fuel consumption. Okay, so if that starts to decline, then investors are going to go, this is a short-term investment. So you either have to increase your dividend or invest in the only thing in the energy sector that is mid to high double-digit growth, which is alternative renewables. What you're going to do, right? That's one thing. Another thing is that there isn't a major company in the world that doesn't have a chief sustainability officer now, because they're put back on their heels. They know it's turning against them. So what we want to do, and this is where we've had an argument with our millennial teammate, I said, I want to go to Walmart and say, I want you to give me a lot of money for my nonprofit, but I'm not going to take your money until Tim and I go in and talk to you and you make a crew consciousness commitment. You'll lower your carbon footprint for the next 3 years. I'm going to put that up there. You can be proud of that, right? So the consciousness is really tipping in that way. What you're saying is right and valid, but it's valid from a looking backward point of view, not looking forward point of view.
If I could also sort of toss in here, one of the things that's already happened in the European market as opposed to the U.S. market at this point is the banks and insurance companies are now requiring, an increasing number of them, requiring companies to include in their annual reports their climate liabilities and their resource use, because what's happened, for example, just with the fall of oil prices, is a lot of banks found that the companies were now didn't have the resources to make good on the loans. And so as that has become an issue, the companies are now saying, you have to tell me your total dependency on natural resources and the impact climate will have. Otherwise, I'm not going to loan you money. We've got hedge funds that say, we won't buy your stock unless you do this. Insurance companies won't insure you unless you do that. Banks won't loan to you unless you do that. And so, so even if money stays a key driver, what's happening is the conversation about money for the guys who have to be in it for the long time, your insurance company and your bank, they've already started to shift the conversation as to how they're looking at this.
So let me give you a snapshot of oil. So one thing that put me on the map, I predicted $125 a barrel oil when it was $55. I've been right about the price of oil. I wrote this major column recently, okay? Oil is roughly $30 to $35 a barrel. There are only 4 countries in the world that can produce and make money at $30 a barrel. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, and Kuwait. Which means that all the other countries that are producing at 50 to 70, Russia, Nigeria, Venezuela is at 90. What is happening in those 3 countries? Venezuela is in total collapse with like 10,000% inflation, okay? Russian GDP was negative 6% last year, and Nigeria is up for grabs. So what Saudi Arabia is doing for the first time in history is they're going into a share battle to drive down the price, which in the United States is causing, as Tim was saying, the defaults on billions of loans to fracking companies. So there's all kinds of bankruptcies going on in the United States. That was Saudi Arabia's initial intent. But what it is also doing, it's going to have great geopolitical upheaval because the oil exporting countries are losing money with every barrel they export, right? And so Saudi Arabia is going to keep the price down until all the bankruptcies happen in the fracking sector. And once burned, twice wise with the banks. And then what's going to happen is Russia's going to have to figure something else out. And you know, everything's going to be in collapse. At that point, that will accelerate. What you have here has never happened before. A collapse, a 75% drop in the price of oil and no increase in demand. That's the line that we're at right now, okay? So there, everybody could stop taking oil out of the ground right now, and there is a 6 to 9 month supply of reserves sitting in super tankers all around the world in our reserve, right? So that says something. Whenever there's been a drop in price, the demand has gone up. The demand has stayed down, right? Now there's been, so that goes on a little bit longer. People shut down their drilling. You can't keep doing this at a loss. At that point in time, perhaps around 2020, Saudi Arabia is going to take the price up, and the developing countries are going to get screwed by that. But that's the reason. I openly say this, and I write this. This is why we got to get off it now. There won't be $100 barrel oil again until sometime in 2020 or beyond. It'll maybe get up to $60 end of next year, maybe. So as long as it stays down, anybody other than those 4 countries is losing their shirt. And people don't keep losing their shirt forever, right? So I understand what you're saying, but I think we're at a true tipping point. So trust the futurist, okay? Yeah.
So if I took your slide on the things that we can do, for
right?
example, a $50 barrel tax on
well, whatever,
oil,
but right?
Yeah, whatever it is, but we'll go with 50. Changing big box stores to vertical gardens, redefining and redesigning, retrofitting old buildings. If we went through and did all those, redefining work hours, what we'd have is a massive economic slowdown, but not a recession in the United States from the $50 barrel tax.
Right.
We'd have, well, first, we don't have enough big box stores to convert. We have such a huge agricultural output, so there wouldn't be enough space.
Understand.
We don't have the current technology to store extra sunlight that we have.
Tesla's solving that with his gigafactory. That is in the process of being
solved. The problem with Tesla is they are multiple $billion in debt. They haven't yet turned a profit.
Yeah, they have.
They're just being totally subsidized by investors that are thinking that in the future there'll be a payoff. So
okay.
Obviously, we need some transition time.
Right.
I haven't heard you talk about that transition time. How long would you say that we need that transition time, and what can we do about that?
So let me start at the highest level and then drill down. The highest level is that there's nobody in the world that's not going to be subject to climate change. So for the first time in human history, there is one common opponent or one common enemy, and it's basically survival, okay, in the general sense. So climate change is a uniter of global consciousness at the highest level, okay? Now that's the high level. Drilling down from that, you're right. The only way we survive on this spaceship Earth is if we redefine the consumer economy. What I see happening in the millennial generation is a movement from material consumption to experiential consumption. The baby boomers live to work, the millennials are working to live. They don't take full-time jobs, they take part, or they do it for a while and then they go off. So we have to convert what the definition of consumption is. Tim has come up with a phrase, there's fast fashion, within 8 weeks we can have a new fashion. Slow fashion. Buy something of value and own it. There's that whole movement of owning only 100 pieces of 100 objects. So there's already that stuff in the zeitgeist. There will be an economic collapse in the old definition of the term, but there's never been an economic correlation to growth and happiness. Bhutan is the only country in the world that has a happiness quotient, okay? If politicians had to run on a happiness quotient, things would be different. I don't see people getting, so we have to, that's why I'm starting with crew consciousness. If somebody starts acting as crew, we're going to have crew shopping bags because paper or plastic are both bad decisions. So we're going to have a bag that says, this Spaceship Earth crew. And I'm waiting for the moment when two people simultaneously check out of a Publix somewhere and they see each other holding a crew bag. There'll be a connection there. That's what I'm trying to get to. And then there'll be more connections. And then it becomes a we rather than a me. As Tim said, when you're in rush hour traffic, it's always the other people in the traffic, not you, right? So there will be that. But when the bankers, the central bankers of the world say climate change is the #1 risk to our economy, it's either going to be catastrophe we have to react to, or massive disruption that we choose to manage. You go back to everything that FDR did with the Great Depression, right? Or how we Detroit made us beat Hitler because they turned to making armaments. It's that type of redeployment of consciousness. And Rosie the Riveter, right? Women didn't do that, but Rosie did, right? So there is that's why I'm going to the conscious. That's my part. Other people are doing other things. Tesla is end to end. You talk about his debt. I just did the math, right? 300,000, that's $300 million in the bank in the last week, deposits only, right? He has a gigafactory that is completely solar and wind powered. So he has the end-to-end solution. You know about the power pack, right, or not? Yeah, okay, so, and he's got 100,000 orders for that, for the utility one. Because the utilities realize the utilities are at the brink of bankruptcy because they have to keep a peak load, and increasingly with alternative renewable, they're going to lose money. So they have to start playing the game. So the inevitability of the direction will cause massive disruption. No question about it. It's either massive disruption or massive catastrophe. But that's the thing about climate change. I think it's, in a way, it's a connection on a consciousness level. We have these T-shirts that I made a deposit in nonprofit so we could order stuff. It says, this Spaceship Earth, and on the back in big letters, cap letters, it says crew. I want people to wear crew T-shirts. There's the existing metaphor. You go to a rock concert, crew, or, whatever it is, right? But you're right. There's nothing you've said that is literally wrong, but we have to redesign the consumer economy. Ultimately, that's at the root of it, right? Because the Americans we're 4% of the population, 25% of the consumption of energy. We have to get down to 4% of the consumption of energy, and the only way we can do that is alternative renewable, right? And fortunately, the way I say it when I talk to business people is this is going to happen. Instead of denying it and think it's going to cost more, what's the opportunity for you to get rich in this? The first person who is on our founding donor page, who wanted to become a founding donor, is a good friend of mine. She's a realtor because she got the following equation. Her name is Gabi. Gabi, when will it become fraud in Sarasota to sell beachfront property? Right? Because I guarantee you by 2020, and if not then certainly by 2025, you will not be able to buy beachfront property and get a 30-year mortgage. It'll probably be cash or a 10-year mortgage. Why do I have a 10-year mortgage? Because the bank doesn't think there's going to be collateral there after 10 years, right? So Gabi and other real estate people say, okay, I'm going to make my clients a lot of money to sell before the general awareness becomes that all the beachfront property is going to be gone by 2040. And if you wait too late, it's going to be a fire sale, right? Who wants to buy $3 million? What's my best offer? $100, you got it, because it won't be here next year, right? So it has to start somewhere. And I think Tim and I are standing with consciousness, you know, because your question and your question are in the blocking and tackling metrics of the current landscape. And it's the current landscape of siloed thinking that has got us here in the first place.
I think the thing that maybe both of us are sensing, it seems like that I mean, I agree, the ideas are great, and I like the consciousness, but it also feels like there is, or not seeing the enemy, like why are we here? And in many ways, it's because there are a huge block of the population that benefits from this particular way of seeing and wants to sustain it and will fight to sustain it. I mean, often literally fight. And if we don't see that, if we just like kind of think, okay, if we just change the way they think, I think that's going to be detrimental. That'll be. Maybe that's not. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm not hearing everything you're saying.
So at the most fundamental human level, be the change you want to see in the world, right? So that's what I want to do, and I've got credibility. I've spoken on all 6 continents, and so I've got this credibility as a futurist. And if I can take this credibility as a futurist, and there's no other futurist who's doing this, they're all doing the stuff I still do. You know, talking about artificial intelligence and the tipping point of robotics and what's going to right. But if I do this and I say this is it, and I'm want to spend the rest of my life talking about this, I'm making that. Tim's making that. Somebody else will make it. You know. Margaret Mead, it's amazing how a small group of people can change the world. In fact, they're the only ones that ever have, right? So I'm doing it. The Greenpeace people are, spelunking in the bridge in Portland so the ships can't get out, right? So it's starting to get a critical mass, and they'll fight back. There's no question. Vested interest always controls. But if vested interest is about making money and you're in the fossil fuel industry and you've declared bankruptcy, that's an oxymoron, right? If you're ExxonMobil and your profits are going down and all the easy oil has been taken. So ExxonMobil has to pay a whole lot. That's why Brazil and Petrobras is in collapse, because they can't drill where they said they wanted to because it's so expensive. They were expecting $125 a barrel of oil. Now it's 30. That's shut down. So the good news about what Saudi Arabia is doing is it's keeping the price low enough that people will get out of that business because they can't make money. Right? So the ExxonMobils that you say own the media are going to sell the media off to pay the dividend. So it's a cascading effect, right? Perhaps, I put it this way. I'm a futurist and I've been right a lot. I'm not saying you're wrong. My job is to see the future. That's my value. So to some degree that I can open your consciousness, you're still fundamentally right about the way the world looks right now, But, I think the Cubs are going to win the World Series this year. Right? I mean, I really think they are. I'm not a Cubs fan, but they're loaded, right? So if if this spaceship Earth launches the year that the Cubs win the pennant, I rest my case.
I'm from Chicago, they're not going to win.
We'll see. Any conversations?
Well, it's already started having, because British Petroleum is no longer British Petroleum.
It's
right?
BP.
Right.
And they're green and yellow for their
They're
logo.
an energy company, they're not a...
Right.
France just asked Elon Musk to open up a factory in France.
Oh, yeah. And the Chinese are all over him, right? And my friend, Jonathan Fleece, who's an attorney, has a Tesla. And I wrote a column, a very short column to be published in China, and it shows his dashboard, okay? There are superchargers. You can drive from Sarasota to any major city in the United States in a Tesla because he has superchargers that charge up to 170-mile range in 20 minutes, and they're all located near Starbucks or shopping centers or restaurants, right? And then there's 5 times that it takes an hour to an hour and a half. So the point is that in a Tesla car, you can go anywhere in the United States. There's unlimited range. I mean, I was just astounded when I saw this on this dashboard. They have it on the dashboard, right? Here's how you get to LA from Sarasota. And it's amazing, right? I mean, so it is there. And the Chinese have to do it. I was in Shanghai in January, so I was there for 1 week, and the particulate count, and help me out if I misstate this, Tim, the particulate count while I was there was 175 to 275. And half of the population is wearing masks as they're walking in the street, and you really can hardly see. I think at 50, so they were in the orange zone, or yellow to orange zone. In the United States, I think it's the red zone at 50 particulates, right? So, and there's demonstrations going on. When I was there in August, the highest ranking party official, because of where I was talking, was sitting next to me and he leaned into me and says, we're going to do something about climate change, because they know that social unrest leads to public change, right? And I mean, in China they're making designer face masks now, right? So there's a great emigration. The single greatest flight capital going on in the world right now is out of China. And the Chinese are saying, I can't afford my children to grow up in this environment. So that is going to make the Chinese party change. You know, thank God for China, because they overproduced and undercut our prices in solar. So solar is now cheap as coal for energy creation. So I mean, I don't know.
One of my favorite air quality photos for China was a building where the 5th floor was on fire. And nobody called it in because because they couldn't see it. I mean, it just looked like air. It looks like regular air. So yeah.